Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Hosick. I am a veteran firefighter, a fire department chaplain, a psychotherapist, and a professional speaker trainer. Let me first say that I bring this to you because of the wonderful generosity of the Mi'kmaq people, on whose ancestral land I live, work, play, and learn. Through their generosity, they invited me, an Irish Catholic settler, to be a firekeeper, a staff carrier for the Sundance. I'm eternally grateful for this graceful honor. The First Nations people are a storied people. In Canada, we have the colonial heritage that tried to take away their stories and their spirituality, and we built residential schools, we cut their hair, we forbade them from speaking their own language, we took away social relationships and institutionalized them, replaced their esteem with alcohol, their familial love with violence. We made them ashamed of their heritage. We are at a unique time in Canada. We can no longer pretend we didn't do what we did. We can no longer keep it hidden. The invitation to be reconciled is an invitation to all groups to participate in each other's healing, recognizing colonial ideology, its biases, and its shortcomings, with the help of all of us to become whole people. This is the very spirit of Sundance.
Given that context, I'd like to tell our story. I've been serving as a first responder for over 20 years. I often describe life as a firefighter as merely the large print edition of humanity. We are with people at the worst moment of their lives. Things are bad when we arrive and work at it being better when we leave. We learn to cope, but a bit of residue always hangs around. Many years ago, Jeffrey Mitchell and George Everly developed a system called Critical Incident Stress Management, and we learned to deal with disturbing incidents which accumulate, affecting our partners, our children, our community, and within ourselves. I've made it my life's work to study trauma, especially as it affects the culture of an organization. Mitchell and Everly urged us to begin to tell stories. When we talk about our life, events, the intrusions, abandonment, and isolation, we seem to be on a similar quest to my brothers and sisters of the First Nation, a quest for wholeness and a quest for healing.
During the preparatory fast for Sundance in May of 2019, a lodge keeper and I sat to discuss our mutual problems of suicide, trauma, and community. We recognize that trauma, whether it's through a history of residential schools or shock trauma from human disasters, has a profound intrusion in the personal and communal lives of our peoples. Both communities suffer addiction and suicide, domestic violence, familial abuse of children. We work towards this healing by strengthening each other as a community. In developing a healing culture, we can reclaim who we are, what's important to us, and how we can develop a new pathway. Early in my experience of Sundance, I felt the call to integrate my experience with what I know about psychotherapy. In that May meeting, the lodge keeper and I offered to each other the resources of our community to the other community in a spirit of cultural reconciliation. We were both humbled that Spirit would invite us, and we took up our task. The Sundance is a deeply sacred and personal journey for those wishing to heal from addiction, violence, suicidal thoughts, premature death, and isolation. In respect to this sacredness, I will not be showing any photographs, but a mere overarching description of the stages of healing as interpreted by a Western psychotherapist. If this interests you, I would encourage you to begin your own quest of how you can be a student, healed of your own struggles, be a healer to others, and a full participant in a community with like-mindedness for reconciliation. So let's look at psychotherapy from an integral perspective. The basic premise is that we have an inner security system that monitors four environments concurrently. The first camera, called the personal internal camera, records the data seen on the inside of a person. We call this the I quadrant. This is where our feelings, our perceptions, our traumas, our values, our analysis, our filters, our preferences, all of these are personal property of the private world of the personal perception. And what goes on here stays here unless it's shared or it leaks out with a slip of the tongue or a dissociated action. The study of phenomenology is the study of human experience. It is the basis of qualitative research and began with the work of Edmund Husserl, furthered by Johns Hopkins professor James Mark Baldwin. The second quadrant highlights the environment of the individual action. This quadrant is called the it quadrant, and this camera is the personal external camera. This includes anything which is visible and can be recorded, which may include speaking, expressive arts, appropriate or inappropriate behavior. And when these elements are expressed, they take a life of their own. We've all heard the expression of having to eat my words or my words coming back to bite me. And once you've tossed that rock into the pond, you can't stop the ripples. So it has reverberating effect on other people. The study of behavior and the predominance of cognitive behavioral therapy is the study of human thought and behavior. It's the basis of quantitative research and began with the work of John B. Watson, behavioral, and Edward Thorndike, cognitive. When the inside perception matches the outside action, we are said to have congruence or integrity. So let's do a quick recap. Not only do we have the I quadrant, which is the inside of an individual, and the it quadrant, which is the outside of the individual, we also participate in a group. These group dynamics have a significant impact on us. This is the we quadrant, and it explores who we are as a group and who I am as a member or a non-member of a group. How do you know if you belong or not? What are the cultural nuances? How do we interpret history? What bonds us together? I know as a firefighter, I could walk into a fire station in Liechtenstein and I would be welcome. In fact, that fire station in Liechtenstein, everyone spoke German except me, and no one knew English except the phrase, "Do you want a beer?" Cultural of First Nations is re-emerging, and as they learn their cultural teaching, the culture of first responders is that of a community-based trauma-centered organization, which, by nature of accumulated trauma, disintegrates quicker than many other organizations. In the late 50s and early 60s, Eric Berne, a psychoanalyst by training, developed Freud's theory of the id, superego, and ego into transactional analysis, the inner child, the inner parent, and the inner adult, and he mapped the transactions of how one part triggers another in someone else. Virginia Satir is known as the grandmother of family therapy, was interested and offered to us the theory of how family systems work. The fourth quadrant is labeled its because its is the plural of it. Where it has a single action, its is a pattern, a series of actions that take on a life of its own. Rituals, ceremonies, rites, patterns, traditions. Systems have a way of inviting participants into something bigger than themselves, which has the empowering experience of connecting them to something a lot of other people are investing in. Thus, Sundance, as an example, is a rite, a ceremony in which all people can participate. A healthy ceremony seeks to serve the individual wherever they are and help them move to whatever the next step is. A collective gathering with a singular intention and attention is very powerful. We'll talk more about Sundance in a moment, but right now let me draw your attention to the father of systems thinking in cybernetics, Ludwig von Bertalanffy and Ross Ashby. So what's on the top is the individual, and what's on the bottom is the collective. What's on the left side of the quadrant is the internal experience, the inward perceptions, and what's on the right side is the external experience, or the outward action or series of actions. I recognize that many First Nations have variances of the Sundance. For some, it is one day, for others, it is four. The traditions vary, but the intent is to make our life in alliance and surrender with Spirit. The teaching handed down to us came from the Blackfoot roots on the Canadian prairies. Based on a vision and a desire for healing, some of our people from Elsipogtok First Nation danced with the Blackfoot, then brought it home to Atlantic Canada, then journeyed to Geskapapik First Nation. The Sundance is a gathering of community for healing. We gather for a 4-day ceremony. The days prior, we prepare. Dancers and helpers gather with the same intention. We will move through this time together as a community. Some of our dancers are warriors, some dance the medicine wheel, and some fast without food or water. Together as a community, we spend 4 days traversing the 4 phases of healing. These 4 phases are the basis of what I bring to you to heal the wounds. Day 1 of the Sundance is the day of the hit. It's the day of piercing. Men and women are pierced through their skin in 2 places, and a peg is inserted in the incision. The men have a cord looped around the peg, and the cord is kept taut through the dancing periods. This is the truth about intrusions. We become enmeshed with our pain, and we cannot separate what we know about who we are and how we're suffering. This piercing is voluntary, and we recognize that while we voluntarily are pierced, many victims of domestic violence, abuse, and trauma do not have that choice. Their very being is pierced, invaded, intruded, and the impact of the pain has devastated them, their partners, their children, and their community. This is the place where our flashbacks take us, the unresolved, incomplete processing, the realization of the impact on life lies in this experience. We are unable to respond, helpless to prevent its return. The surprise arises, and the surprise arises each time the flashback reoccurs. During this time, a rush of adrenaline comes to our defense, and the corresponding symptoms of critical incident stress emerge. Lack of focus, insomnia, eating issues, intimacy issues, anxiety, depression, isolation, anger, and here we experience what's called a moral injury. Pain is too much to absorb. Our pain enmeshes us with our experience, and what we believe about the world is disseminated. Our pain becomes our focus, so we lose connection to the transcendent. This is not a place where we wish to go. There are no bright sides. We are in the dark, alone and afraid. We are in hell. We are burning. And in this effort to connect with each other, we voluntarily enter a place of suffering as an attempt to open up our hearts to feel the connection with those who suffer involuntarily. The suicidal, the shame, the displaced, the victims of violence, the addicted, by voluntarily entering suffering, they seek empathy, understanding, capacity, and grace to sit with those who sit alone. Day 2 of the 4-day Sundance is the day of suffering. It's affectionately known as Monkey Brain Day. Pain and suffering are not the same. Pain is the external intrusion. Suffering is what we do with it. We tend to make meaning in our circumstances, and we construct drama or a rationale, which allows us to step back from it even for the briefest moments. If we are here, we're feeling too much, We tend to compensate by overthinking or overanalyzing. Why am I suffering? Must be because of my parents. Or we can answer that question ourselves. If only if I were a little thinner. Maybe if I weren't quite so homely. Maybe if I were just smarter. Well, we do that, and it's called regret. If I only told my dad I loved him before he died. It's magical thinking in a way, but knowing it's magical doesn't take away from the fact that we still need to endure it. The nature of suffering brings us to ourselves on our own timeline. If I suffered a trauma when I was 6, I processed that trauma as a 6-year-old. And when I go to revisit that trauma at 30, I don't process it as a 30-year-old. I process it where I left off as a 6-year-old. When we enter fully into our suffering, we begin to experience ourselves as the fractured people we are. We don't really tend to do that. We'd much prefer to avoid it if we could, which works for a while. But there is an old saying, eventually, the chickens come home to roost. It is in this stage where we learn to cope. Wounds need to be treated, so suffering by nature draws attention to itself. And as I said, our natural tendency is to get away from this destruction as fast and as far as possible. We dissociate. Those who over-identify with feelings begin to overthink and overanalyze, as I said. Those whose hearts are broken focus extensively on the pain and become hard towards others. The opposite effect is also true. When we identify with someone who's suffering, we want to rescue them. No matter how hard we argue otherwise, we're not really rescuing them. We are simply avoiding our own suffering. Here is the first of two naturally occurring whirlpools. The difficulty lies because the day 2 suffering is temporary and temporarily relieved with coping mechanisms. And as soon as we receive one, we use it, and after solving one element of the intrusion, we believe we can cope with the rest. We stop resolving because we're coping. Flashbacks, however, are unprocessed intrusions which are multidimensional. When flashbacks hit the play button, the process begins where it stopped. If you're overwhelmed when it stopped, you'll be overwhelmed when you pick it up again. Many people get stuck here, hence the whirlpool. And as therapists, if we focus on outcomes, as soon as the pain is relieved by coping mechanisms, the goal of the relieving the pain is done. We use our coping mechanisms until they are overused and fail. Conventional wisdom has us returning to counseling for more or better coping mechanisms. Since there's a big disconnect between the therapists and first responders, some first responders tell me, Jeff, I've been to 3 counselors now. I can barely get through my backstory when the counselor is already toast. This is just our everyday life. I didn't even get a chance to talk about what I wanted to talk about, and the counselor is already overwhelmed. Yes, if we as therapists cling to our strengths, we cannot fully listen to the story of our clients because we're formulating our rescue efforts as we listen, which means we really aren't listening at all. Rapport is not fully established. And when we truly had confidence in our skills, we would be able to set them down and walk into the dark with our client to build that rapport. Then, with it gained, we can be committed to venturing back and forth from day 1 to day 2 as often as needed until the client has gained the full understanding. You will not leave them and you will not exploit them. One ceremony does not do the whole cleanse. Day 3 of the Sundance is the day of connection. The community is still suffering from the monkey brain day. However, on this day, we begin to recognize the monkey brain in the whole community. There's a shift from the individual experience to the corporate experience. I'm still suffering, but now I have compassion for my brother dancing next to me, or that woman in the crowd who suffered domestic abuse at the hands of an alcoholic. That compassion now reaches beyond my fellow fasters and dancers. It's now linked to the whole community, and I'm aware that they suffer as I suffer. That link of being screwed up together is the invitation to experience grace, an uncommon strength that's more powerful than any suffering, a power or presence that wants to be present with every single corner of my darkness, not because it's healing, but because nothing separates me from it anymore. What's most important on day 3 is my isolation is broken. Now that I do not suffer alone, my intention is upon the need of the whole community, for which I belong. Day 4 is the day of healing. It's a tough day. Who am I now when I've been healed? We're so used to being broken. Relating to myself as a healed person means I'm whole now than I ever was. And the ecstasy of being healed is sometimes more overwhelming than the pain, mostly because we lose our emotional GPS. We used to measure how far away we were from our pain or how much the pain was around us. So now that the pain is gone, we don't exactly know where we stand anymore. We've grown used to looking for dark clouds even on a sunny day. We're in a new world of expectation, and we've accomplished all that we've set out to do. We've been a part of something bigger than all of us, and we've contributed to the community, and the community has contributed to us. So, how do we integrate this? That's the question from day 4. Here is the second whirlpool. The Sundance community, hosted in a specific location, dissolves. We have faced a common foe together, and we have prevailed. We are brothers in arms. We are sisters of grace. But the community dissolves. Sometimes we want to hang on to the experience of triumph, and further healing means we travel now no longer in the group, and the experience of that triumph is fading. I'm now alone to face and directly to connect to what work is left to be done. Many people in recovery form natural bonds with the others in the group, but if they are no longer there, do I stop my healing journey until I see them next? Have I grown so attached to the ceremony that I think I will not progress without it? Next year's Sundance is a year away, and I won't be the same person, and the same people will not gather next year. They too will be different, and some will have grown, and some will have passed away and not be there at all. Others will fall. But I move past the loyalty of the group to my own healing. Day 5 of the 4-day Sundance is the toughest day of all. Yes, you heard me. Day 5 of a 4-day Sundance is the toughest day of all. It is the day after we return to our home, and we must fit our new sense of self into habits, patterns, and beliefs I had before the Sundance. Now I must decide which part of me needs to change to fit my life, and which part of my life needs to change to accommodate my new sense of self. There are no easy answers. However, a good therapist can help bridge this gap. We as therapists, switching hats here, remember, we listen, we celebrate, and we put the pieces together so we can ask the most helpful questions, reflect on beliefs, look for incongruence between the I quadrant and the it quadrant. We can strategize how to be in the group with the we quadrant and honor the experience of Sundance, even though the others may not have had this experience. We may need to see how to adjust our personal and familial systems so that we can change patterns, ask for what we need, seek a new attitude and a new practice, perhaps. That's the it's quadrant.
I would like to say that first responders do well in recovery. as well as our First Nations people. We don't. We're different. Tomorrow, I may need to rescue someone from a house fire. I'll need to cut someone out of a car. For us, the growing edge is to have therapists understand us so that we can be and build a healed community, a community that is defined by us, a community that understands the threat of post-trauma, a group who understands that we first need to stop contributing to a toxic workplace. Our community needs to use the language of our community to understand mental health. We need to borrow words from the therapy world for a while until we can relate mental health to our world in our language, just as the First Nations people have done. Thanks for watching. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I'll take some questions now. In case you didn't notice, I pack a lot of information in these seminars, and some find they need to go through it more than once, maybe even more than twice. The presentation is on my website. It's free under Jeff in the Media. The other resources are there as well, the course on flashbacks and the consultation information about toxic workplace trauma. Until the next time, I am Jeffrey Hosick, the Firefighter Guy.